into a deal with, who would become kingmaker with, Labour or the Conservatives. But there it is. He has announced that he is going to stand. He's going to stand in Clacton. He says he's going to be the new leader of the Reform Party. That leader, of course, was Richard Tice, and Nigel Farage was the honorary chairman. That has now been inverted. Richard Tice is now the chairman, and Nigel Farage is now the leader of that party. Richard Tice is now just going to stand separately as an MP. Nigel Farage says he hopes that this will ginger up the campaign. He says the election needs a bit of gingering up. It's been a boring campaign. The main leaders are all sounding the same, he says. He also accused the Conservatives of lying about their figures. He says he has decided he's changed his mind. Now we can talk to Rob Powell, who is our political correspondent, who is on the Conservatives bus at the moment, following the Conservative campaign. Rob, what kind of reaction has there been from within those around you about the possibility that Nigel Farage is not suspected to stand, but he is going to stand? He is taking the Tories head on, really, isn't he?
Yeah, not a lot of reaction so far. There's not actually many Tories on the bus. It's mainly media at the moment coming back from the 2 visits that we've been on. But I think in terms of what Nigel Farage said, look, I don't think it could have been much worse for the Conservatives, quite frankly. Not only is he announcing that he will run for a Westminster seat, he is announcing that he is taking over as leader as well, which clearly gives him a lot more media exposure. It means he'll be involved in debates and things like that. He will be on and around and in people's newspapers and on people's TV screens a lot more than he would have otherwise. So I think this is a really significant development, not just for what it does on polling day and the vote, but really what potentially happens after as well. Clearly it matters for the vote because Reform is mainly taking support and taking votes from the Conservatives, and I think having someone with the profile of Nigel Farage now as the sort of main face of Reform representing that party, well, you would imagine anyway, it would only drive support in one way, and that is only bad for the Tories and, frankly, only good for Labour. But maybe listening to Nigel Farage there, you've got a sense that, yes, while he wants to win a seat and while that matters, this election matters, actually he has his eyes not so much on the next 5 weeks, but on the next 5 years. He talked about Reform wanting to be the biggest party in the 2029 general election. Now, clearly that is a very lofty ambition, but I think the broader point that he's getting at is what potentially happens if this general election plays out in the way that Labour get in and the Tories go down to a crushing defeat. A lot of the polls suggest that may be what's going to happen. What happens afterwards if Nigel Farage manages to get in is that you have got a pretty loud, controversial but also influential voice on the right of politics in Westminster, working with or around a Conservative Party that has just gone down to a devastating defeat and is potentially licking its wounds and deciding what direction it wants to go in next. So I know this sounds like we're getting kind of very ahead of ourselves, but I think that the part of the reason why what we heard this afternoon is so important is because of how it might play out in the years following the general election. Clearly, in terms of this campaign, though, we will have to watch where the polling numbers go for Reform over the coming weeks, whether in those constituencies where Labour are battling the Tories for a seat, whether the Reform vote increases to an extent that even more seats start to look like they will go to Labour. Because I think that the irony of all of this is that Nigel Farage is probably the only person who could win a seat in the Commons for Reform, and he's done it in possibly the only constituency where he could win that seat. So this isn't a question of lots of Reform candidates becoming MPs and winning this election. I still think that's hugely unlikely. The reason why it matters for this vote is because if it pulls more voters across from the Tories to Reform, that makes it far more likely that Labour can take more seats. And I think what's been notable about the Conservative campaign following it for the last week to 10 days is that a lot of the announcements had focused very squarely on the group of voters that may be likely to go to reform. You've had announcements about national service, about pensions. Look at the stuff today about single-sex spaces and changing the Equality Act so that sex means biological sex. It's all aimed at reform voters, but holding them back just got a lot more difficult.
Hey, Rob, thanks very much for that. Well, he's going to stand. Will he achieve it, though? He stood as an MP 7 times and failed. Is it going to be 8th time lucky? Let's bring in John Craig, our political correspondent. And what concerns will the Labour Party and the Lib Dems have about this? It's possible that, yes, he could take votes for the Conservatives, but he could take votes from Labour as well, couldn't he?
Well, he claimed just now that he expected Reform UK to take votes in pretty equal numbers from the Conservatives and Labour. Can he win in Clacton? It's a seat where UKIP won a by-election. Douglas Carswell defected from the Tories to UKIP and won a by-election in 2014. It is currently represented by Giles Watling, a former actor who had a majority of 24,702 at the last election.
We're going to have to leave it there because we're going to take a quick break. Coming up at 5 o'clock on Sky News, we're going to publish YouGov's first projected forecast of the election campaign. What's the House of Commons going to look like after the election? Stay with us to find out.
Hello, you're watching Sky News and we're just seconds away from 5 o'clock when the moment we reveal the first poll-based projection of the election campaign right here on Sky News. It's now 5 o'clock and we can now reveal that Keir Starmer could be heading to Downing Street with a majority of 194 seats, bigger than Tony Blair achieved in 1997. And that is according to the first major polling projection by YouGov of this campaign, partnering with Sky News. Now, our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has been pouring through all the numbers. Sam.
This is an extraordinary moment for the campaign. 194 seats is the projection of YouGov if there was a general election tomorrow. To put that in context for you, Sophie, this is a bigger figure than any election for 100 years. It's bigger than 1997, when Blair won that landslide. It's bigger than anything Margaret Thatcher could. Let's look at what YouGov today say the House of Commons would look like under their numbers. And you can see here, this is an amazing figure. 422 seats out of 650 for the Labour Party. That is a record. That's the highest figure for any seats, any party at an election. But of course, that comes at the expense of these people, the Conservatives. Rishi Sunak, under this projection, well, he would see his number of seats tank below the estimate of most Tory MPs I've been speaking to 140 seats. It would be a good night for this man, Ed Davey. The Liberal Democrats are projected to be on 48 seats, a big advance on where they were in the 2019 general election. Reform, well, you might have noticed in the last few hours, he's no longer the leader. That's Nigel Farage. We'll get that changed in an hour or two, but they still wouldn't win any seats under YouGov's projection. Now look at this, up in Scotland, John Swinney, the leader, but his seat tally crashes as well. Of the 56 seats that there are in Scotland, the SNP would only have about 17 under the YouGov projection. Now, what this is a combination of polls and mathematical modelling that looks at every single constituency in the United Kingdom in order to work out the change in vote and change in seats in every seat. So let's look at the change right now. And here you have it. Look at this, a huge increase for Keir Starmer and pretty much corresponding change for Rishi Sunak. But look at this, the Liberal Democrats here, they actually quadruple their seats. The Greens gain one and no change on zero for Reform. And look at that, the SNP over here, they lose over half their seats. That would be a very disappointing night, but so much turbulence in Scotland means that's problems are coming their way. So let's look at the headlines right now of this polling projection from YouGov. It's known as an MRP. The most Labour seats in history. The worst Tory rout since 1906. The collapse of the SNP and the Liberal Democrats quadruple their seats. My goodness, Sophie, it's quite a projection.
Quite a projection is one way of putting it. Sam, I just want to take a moment to step back because this is an extraordinary projection, isn't it? I mean, we've been talking about hung parliaments, we've been talking about the swing that Keir Starmer would need in order to even just limp over the line with a handful of seats in his majority. And yet this is a historic win, if it happens, of course.
That's right. Of course, it's only one snapshot. It's only if the general election is tomorrow. So we will never know, in effect, whether all this is right, because anything could change between now and July the 4th. But I have to say, this is a verdict on the opening phase of the election campaign. And remember, a lot of people thought that Keir Starmer had an extraordinary mountain to climb because of the hole that Labour was left in by Jeremy Corbyn in that 2019 general election. But what we're looking at, I think, in this projection, and there'll be two more of them from YouGov that we report on Sky between now and election day on July the 4th, is one of those elections where quite possibly we'd see a proper shift in the way that Britain does its politics, a real turning of the tides, as it were. And there has been, it seems, a collapse, as it stands, as far as we can tell from this polling projection, in support for the Conservatives. And, you know, as Boris Johnson said as he was departing Downing Street, when the crowd moves, when the herd moves, it moves. And this is what it feels like could well be happening with British public opinion right now at this early phase of the general election campaign?
Yeah, I mean, just listen to what you say. Look at the words on the screen. The most Labour seats in history, the worst Tory rout since 1906. And you're talking there about almost like a redrawing of the political map. And I guess, that chimes with what I know many people that you've been speaking to and also that I have as well, that, this isn't just about whether or not Rishi Sunak manages to win. It's about what happens to the Conservative Party. Is this existential? And looking at the results of this MRP poll, how nervous do you think those MPs will be?
I think Tory MPs are getting more and more nervous by the day. Look, the YouGov result, in my view, is the gold standard when it comes to polling and polling projections. This is the company that brought what's known as MRP projections to the United Kingdom in 2017, where they were the first to reveal that Theresa May was probably going to get hung Parliament. They forecast Boris Johnson winning in 2019. And look at this, the worst Tory rout since 1906, Sophie. You've got to remember, it was barely 10 days ago that Rishi Sunak called this election on his own terms because he thought that it was the optimal moment for the Conservatives. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he thought he could win. He did think he could minimise losses. But when you look at 140 seats or so for the Conservatives coming out of the other end of the ringer in this polling projection, my goodness, you've got to wonder, was that the right decision? Or was this really the only option? Has this always been the path that the Tories have been going on? But it doesn't look good if you were a Conservative MP seeking re-election in this campaign.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's the timing, the decision on the timing, and also, I guess, the verdict on the campaign so far as well and how that's gone. With a result like this, you would expect to see several very high-profile Conservative MPs losing their seats, wouldn't you? We've got a few faces around us that have magically appeared on the wall, Sam. Talk us through what we're looking at.
These are some of the biggest names in our politics, aren't they? So if you look, Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the Commons, Grant Shapps, Welwyn Hatfield, the Defence Secretary, Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary. Every single one of these, right now, is projected on course to lose at the general election. Look at them. You might not be seeing these faces for very much longer, Sophie. Let's pick out some of them. Grant Shapps, he's the Defence Secretary. Some people think he's been doing something of a little bit of a leadership, kind of, sort of playing footsie with Tory MPs to see whether he could be leader after the election. Well, he is set to lose, under this projection, to Labour, his Welwyn Hatfield seat, by 18 points. So goodbye, Grant, is the message of this projection. Let's look at Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the Commons, Portsmouth North, one of the most famous faces in Rishi Sunak's cabinet. And what's happening to her seat? She might lose her Portsmouth North seat by 5 points. Potentially Babai Mel Stride, although he's in the balance, he is only projected to lose by 1 point. Look at this. This is the person in the cabinet in the most trouble. Not one of the most high-profile faces, but called Alex Chalk. He's the Justice Secretary. He's the MP for Cheltenham. Cheltenham has always sort of swung between the Tories and Lib Dems. He is projected to lose to the Lib Dems, go down here, by 31 points. Wow, that doesn't look good for him. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, he could lose to Labour. He's down 4 points. Jeremy Hunt, possibly the second most important person in the cabinet after Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, became Chancellor under Liz Truss, still there under Rishi Sunak, fighting this election. That was a bit of a surprise. Go down a bit, look at this result. He is due, under this projection, to lose to the Lib Dems by 15 points. That's quite a margin. That's going to be hard to come back from. You'll remember Jeremy Hunt at the weekend gave a newspaper interview where he said he was very worried about his seat. Let's look at some other faces, famous ones, all of them. Johnny Mercer, pugnacious Defence Minister. He's also in the cabinet. He could lose his Plymouth seat by 11 points. Simon Hart, the Chief Whip, he's meant to be instilling discipline. Whether or not he can do so at the moment, given these results, it's a lot harder. He could lose his Wales seat to Labour by 9 points. Esther McVey, Minister without portfolio, also known as the Minister for Common Sense. Her seat, it's a bit of a toss-up there, lose to Labour by 1 under this. The Welsh Secretary could lose his Wales seat because he is projected to be 11 points down to Labour. The Education Secretary could lose her Chichester seat to the Lib Dems by 5, and the Attorney General, Victoria Prentice, she's down 6 to Labour. These are the faces that we see daily on our TV screens, but maybe, Sophie, for not much longer, because they are, every single one of these, 12 faces are in deep, deep trouble.
I should say, if you are one of the Conservative MPs currently pictured on our TV screens right now and you're watching this, I can only apologise. It's just obviously one MRP. I'm sure there's lots of time to turn things around. And I'm particularly going to be interested in this man who I'm going to be interviewing later today as well. Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary. 18 points. That is not looking good for the Defence Secretary.
That's a big margin. That's a big margin. I'm sure he'll have views.
And also, it's interesting, isn't it, the pincer movement between both Labour and the Liberal Democrats. It's not just that the Conservatives are losing seats to the Labour Party here. You know, we've got Penny Mordaunt doing that, Mel Stride. But if you're looking at people like Alex Chalk and, of course, Jeremy Hunt as well, it's that kind of pincer movement, isn't it, in different parts of the country, shedding votes to just about everybody.
That's right, Sophie. One of the biggest surprises for me in this MRP, in this polling projection from YouGov, is just how well the Liberal Democrats are doing, not just in this seat, that seat, Gillian Keegan over there, but overall, by quadrupling their vote, they have done far better than they were saying they were going to do when you and I were down in Bournemouth at Liberal Democrat Party conference in September. Back then, privately, people around Ed Davey were saying maybe we could be in the high 20s. This polling projection suggests that the Liberal Democrats are going to smash that out of the water. Why? I think it all comes down to the scale of the Conservative collapse. That's the biggest driver, it looks like, in all this. It's about people wanting these faces not to be in government, not to be in Parliament anymore. That's the thing that's driving our politics, the numbers suggest.
Not just Ed Davey falling out of a paddleboard, then you think that. OK, let's have a look at the geography, shall we? We've been talking about the faces, but I'm always, I have to say, I love a good map during the election campaign. I think you learn so much from it, don't you? This isn't the MRP, is it? There's far too much blue in it for that. What's going on?
This is Boris Johnson's Britain of 2019. And look at all the blue. Remember back in 2019, he won with an 80-seat majority. Now, remember, of course, Sophie, that Tories tend to win rural constituencies, so there's quite often quite a lot more blue on a map than there is red anyway, because Labour do well in the urban areas, densely populated areas. But you can already see Labour across many areas that we would call the red wall. They went blue. You can see Conservative heartlands down there, and what was once Liberal Democrat country down there, almost entirely blue as well, and the SNP dominating in Scotland. Yeah,
exactly. That's the other thing I was going to point out as well. It's the blue of Boris Johnson's big majority, wasn't it? But also, this is the key story, isn't it, as well, isn't it? What is happening in Scotland? And you can see back in 2019, the SNP were dominant.
Now we're going to do some magic, Sophie. Look at what our projection says the map would be now. And look at this. Look at all that red. Now, let me just explain the colour scheme for those that are glancing at this for the first time. The darker the colour, the more sure YouGov are that a constituency is going to turn that way. So a light red means Labour are probably going to win. A dark red means that they almost certainly are.
I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, this is a patchwork, isn't it? This is like a patchwork quilt. It's a kaleidoscope of colour. And I guess it does really show what we were discussing before. This is an electoral map that's being redrawn.
So you can see all of the urban areas of Scotland turning red. That's a good night for the Labour Party, good night for the Lib Dems in parts of Scotland. And then you can see the reclaiming of the red wall, as it once was, as it's colloquially known. Political scientists don't like it, around all of this area here, big expanded areas of Labour hegemony there. And then all of this, look at this, this is meant to be true blue heartlands, but you can see the blue getting lighter. You can see big patches of red as Labour properly take over in whole swathes of the country. And look at this. This was David Cameron's big electoral achievement in 2015. In that election, he turned almost all of the southwest blue. And now it's going yellow again.
This is it, isn't it? I often think, if I've been completely honest, that us political analysts spend a lot of time fighting the last battle, so talking about the story of the last election, and obviously the story of the 2019 election was very much the red wall. And as you say, you can see the red wall reforming here. But it's the blue wall that's going to really be worrying, number 10, isn't it? Because this is where things get very difficult for the Conservative Party. Some of these seats, it feels, are factored in, I guess, that, look, it's things that would be hard for them to hang on to in any circumstances. But there's a few seats down there that they'll be very concerned about losing.
Do you know what? I think this map This map actually explains the Conservative election campaign because, yeah, they don't think that they're getting this bit in the general election. To be honest, Rishi Sunak hasn't done a great deal of levelling up. These seats look to me like they were abandoned by the Tories quite some time ago. But look at this. Here we are in the Conservative heartlands. They rely particularly on the pensioner vote in those seats. And there are some extraordinary statistics as Britain's population ages about just how many over 65s are going to be voting on July the 4th. And so those Tory announcements have been aimed squarely at this lot, the announcement about national service, the announcement about boosting pensions, all of those things, all of this swathe around. It's not the urban centres, which tend to be quite a lot younger. And I can tell you, Sophie, Grant Shapps is phoning me.
Take the call.
Yeah, that's
Grant
a good idea.
Shapps is just calling Sam Coates. So it's on his Apple phone. Give him a little minute to get it up, but he is going to take it now.
Hello, Grant Shapps. You're live on Sky News. I'm in the studio with Sophie Ridge. Have you just seen that you're about to lose your seat, according to the Sky News YouGov projection? He just put the phone down on me. There we go.
We did try.
I
thought he
hello.
was calling up for a direct comment, but we will, of course, get more comment from Grant Shapps later on today. Fair enough. Not everyone wants to take a call like that live on Sky News. I'm sure many people will be in the same position as well. But we will reach out to Grant Shapps if you
can only imagine the aides going, put the phone down, put the phone down.
Right, here we go. Here is the headlines from what we've just been talking about.
So, YouGov's projection is that if there is an election tomorrow, the Labour Party would get the biggest majority in 100 years. That the Labour Party would get 422 seats. That, Sophie, is an all-time record. The Conservatives would get 140 seats. That's the worst Conservative total since 1906. So there we've got that repeated underneath. Conservatives' lowest score since 1906. Jeremy Hunt loses to the Lib Dems under this. Grant Shapps puts the phone down and also loses. Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the Commons, she's out to Labour. Jacob Rees-Mogg also loses, potentially goes and stars on reality TV if the weekend papers are to be believed. This is the remaking of Britain's politics, if YouGov have done the sums right.
Of course, and as Sam was saying, it's one projection. We're at the foothills of the election campaign. There is lots more to come as well, and polls typically narrow ahead of a general election. But it's a snapshot right now, and it is bad news for the Conservative. Right, thank you very much. For now, Sam, we'll have lots more from Sam, of course. We can speak now to YouGov's Director of Political Analytics, Patrick English, who joins us now. Patrick, this is an extraordinary result. What do you make of it?
Good evening, Sophie. Yes, it is an extraordinary result. It's seismic, really. What YouGov are projecting here, as you both have been articulating so very well, is quite a historic result if the election were to pan out like this on July the 4th. Now, of course, a lot can change. Even since we've finalised these projections, we found out that Nigel Farage is actually standing for Reform UK. So no doubt that will have impacts on what will happen over the course of the campaign and what will happen to those final numbers. But what we're saying is that if the election were happening right now, and let's remember now it's quite close. It's no longer a hypothetical election. But based on how people are thinking and feeling and what they're telling us right now, this is almost 60,000 people that YouGov has spoken to over the last week. They are saying, well, we are saying right now that Labour will be on course for a super majority, a huge majority, like to which we've not seen in British politics for a long, long time. The Conservatives will be crashing to a terrible defeat. And I think the pincer movement is very important. And you might always call it a trifecta as well, because a lot of the Conservative decline, particularly in those seats across in the east of the country, where they really are losing support heavily, is also due to Reform UK coming in and taking a lot of votes that would otherwise be going Conservative. So they're kind of facing threats on three fronts. And at the minute, it's damaging them heavily, according to our projections.
Yeah, that's interesting, because even though Reform aren't projected to win any seats, they could still have an impact on the election as well. Patrick, I'm going to ask you what I think many of our viewers might be wondering. How much can we trust this? Because, you know, if I talk to Conservative politicians, they always say to me, there's only one poll that matters, which is the poll at the election when people go out and vote. How accurate do MRPs tend to be?
Well, quite, this is a poll. This is a model. This isn't actual voting data. Nobody has voted yet. It's not even an exit poll. And indeed, the poll that will decide whether or not Keir Starmer is number 10 is the poll on the day when people head to the ballot boxes. But MRP is a really great method, a method that YouGov were proud to pioneer in the UK in 2017 and correctly anticipate that Theresa May would lose her majority, which was quite a surprise for everybody, I think. We also got the 2019 general election correct. We've had great success with it in the Spanish general election in 2023. We've used this method to correctly project a bunch of councils as well in the 2023 and 2024 local authority elections. So we're confident in this model. We're confident in MRP, but of course, it's subject to error. It's based on polling data. It's based on survey data, just like any other poll that you would see from YouGov or any of our competitors. There will be things which happen around the edges, local factors that we can't quite capture. One thing that's very important to mention at the minute is that we don't have effects for candidacy in this model. The candidate lists are not yet finalised. So we're thinking about some of the big gun incumbents, independents such as Jeremy Corbyn, maybe Emma Dent Code as well, who might distort or might sort of have a big influence in their specific constituencies. We're not quite going to capture that quite yet with this model, but we will be doing in subsequent models. So a lot can change. We're very confident in MRP and we're very proud to be using it. But of course, it's a poll, it's a projection. Not one vote has been cast yet.
One thing that people say to me quite a lot in Westminster is Keir Starmer is the luckiest politician ever because he's seen the unhappiness of the Conservatives, them losing votes there, and also, of course, the difficulties that the SNP have been facing in Scotland happening at the same time. So it is worth talking about Scotland as well, isn't it? Because the SNP vote, I mean, that would be a very disappointing result for them, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed. What we're projecting at the moment is the SNP would be below 20 seats. Now, we haven't seen that for quite some time after that sort of yellow wave, that swept over Scotland in 2015. We're now projecting that Labour would return to being the largest party in Scotland, which would be a fantastic result for Starmer. And as you say, that counts double really in terms of his quest for a majority. At the minute, we're saying that he doesn't really have to worry about that. But if he were in a situation where the polls were narrowing and Labour were still doing very well in Scotland, it makes that task just that much easier in England and Wales, in those marginals, in the Midlands and in the South, for Keir Starmer to get into number 10. And Scotland, let's be frank, Scotland is a very, very tricky political system for pollsters to model. There are so many marginal constituencies there. You'll notice that those of you who look at our predictions very closely, that a lot of the seats in Scotland we're calling as toss-up seats. The margin on the SNP is between sort of 6 and up to 35 they could win because there's so much uncertainty there, so many fascinating contests up and down the breadth of Scotland. So it's a difficult one, but at the minute we think that they will be below 20 seats.
And how about the Lib Dems and also the Green Party as well? Two parties that, according to your projections, are gaining seats. The Lib Dems, quite a substantial number.
Absolutely, yes, there are stories all over this MRP, as you say, and the Greens will say doubling their parliamentary representation. I think it is a historic moment as well for them, sort of adding, we think, another MP in Bristol Central, unseating the Labour incumbent there. The Carla Denyer, who is standing the Green Party, will be delighted, I'm sure, at the rejection we put out today. And the Liberal Democrats going up to 48 seats. We've not seen the Liberal Democrats get to that level of representation since 2010, since the coalition years and all the debacle around sort of tuition fees and what have you. They seem to be a rising force again in British politics. And we've been seeing it, to be fair. We've been seeing signs of this all throughout local authority elections since 2019. The signs, the warning signs been there for the Conservatives in what we call the blue wall, those areas around London, the south and the east of England that are held by the Conservatives but are Remain voting, are very graduate heavy, lots of young professionals, young people who commute to larger cities, and moving into these areas and taking them away from the Conservatives. And we've been seeing this in local authority elections. And now what we're saying is that we are now about to see it, we think, if these numbers hold through to the general election on July 4th.
OK, thank you so much. And thank you very much for sharing your projections and your MRP polling with us today. Patrick English there of YouGov. Whew, blimey, Sam.
Did he look nervous? Because he's just stuck his neck out and predicted the biggest majority for Labour, for any party, for 100 years since Stanley Baldwin in 1906, in 1924.
He did look quite nervous, but at the same time, I thought he couched it quite carefully, didn't he?
The reason these projections are so powerful is that every single one of the MPs, former MPs, candidates, can look up on the Sky News website what's projected to happen to them. So let's take you around around Great Britain. Of course, we leave out Northern Ireland in this because they vote separately. And let's have a look at the new map. This is 2019. This is the old map, the Boris Johnson Britain map. You can see all of that blue. But let's update it and have a look at what we're projecting now. And there you have the swathes of red around the north. You've got the patchwork further south. But I'm going to take you around a few seats, Sophie. We'll just have a little chat about some of them. Let's start by having a look where we go first. Let's go flying around the UK. North of England. And this is the projected result in the north of England. And you've got, what you can see there is just how much Boris Johnson's political legacy is being undone. Look at the northeast. You've got lots of signs that many of those areas that Ben Houchen hung on to in the Tees Valley Mayor just a few weeks ago as a Conservative, a lot of them are turning red. So let's move on to the next bit. We're going to go flying around the country again and looking at a place that is very special to Sky News. It's Grimsby. You were there just a week ago, weren't you? Now, look at what's happening at our favourite seat in the country. Now, this projects that the Labour share of the vote is going to go up 12, and that's going to mean that it's a Labour gain, 27%. So the Conservative share of the vote is going down 29 percentage points, and Reform is going up 11. Did you pick up this, Sophie, when you were there in Grimsby a week ago? Does that feel like the kind of result that you get from the people that are talking, you were talking to there?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there was a lot of Reform support bubbling around. I have to be honest, though, when I was out and about talking to people in Grimsby, people didn't seem that in love with Keir Starmer, right? You know, they didn't seem convinced by him, but they felt angry about the Conservative Party. And I just wonder if that really does tap into the big story overall, where this astonishing projection tells a story more about voting against the Conservative Party rather than anything else.
And you remember that poll that we did from YouGov last week saying that Keir Starmer will be quite unpopular if he gets in, even if he wins by this kind of landslide. Right, let's go flying around the country again, see where we go to next. And this is the
Getting
London.
slightly dizzy, like, it's like I feel like I'm on a ship or something.
This is the south of London. Right, this tells us a couple of stories. First of all, look at Labour's dominance in London now. You know, Boris Johnson's home city is pretty much all red. And look at how the Tories have really been pushed back into parts of here, but other parties, particularly the Liberal Democrats, are starting to gain a toehold, and Labour as well in some areas of the southwest. Whose is this seat? It's Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor's. Look at this. He's on course to lose. You've got 46% of the vote being taken by the Liberal Democrats. A big advantage over the Tories. Jeremy Hunt is on 31, and then 12% for Labour. Let's move again. This is really interesting. The only member of the shadow cabinet, Labour shadow cabinet, currently projected to lose their seat is in Bristol Central. That's Thangham Debonair, because the Greens are projected to win that seat under this. Bristol's always been a Green stronghold. Could they pick up their second seat in the country? That's what this projection suggests. Let's go again. Go all the way over to Monmouthshire. Why? Because this is the seat of the Welsh Secretary. Could the Welsh Secretary, David T.C. Davies, lose to Labour? Well, under our projection, he does. That would be ironic, to say the least. Let's go flying around the country again up north. And here's a place that has shaped our politics over the last few years. Falkirk wants the Labour seat for Eric Joyce. He was unable to stand in 2015 because he got into a fight in the House of Commons bar. They changed the Labour Party rules that brought in Jeremy Corbyn. This seat can claim, it then went SNP, this seat can claim to be one of those little bellwethers of British politics. And here we have Labour taking it from the SNP, one of those places I always watch on election night because it has its own fantastically fascinating story. So you can see all around the country, you have different stories of different places where the incumbent collapses. In most places, that's the Conservatives, and in some places, that's the SNP. But we are in for a huge night on July the 4th. If any of this, all of this, is anything like as dramatic as the projection suggests.
Yeah, dramatic certainly is a word, a redrawing of the map, if it happens, of course, if it happens. But right now, of course, that is a projection by YouGov. Sam, thank you very much indeed for cantering through the country with us. Now, we are joined by Poppy Trowbridge, who was Philip Hammond's special advisor when he was Chancellor, and also the former Labour advisor, Tom Hamilton. Thank you both very much indeed. Wow is, I guess, the word that I'm looking for today. Poppy, to you first, what do you make of this projection? I mean, what would it mean for the Conservative Party?
How surprised are people that the polls that we've seen over the last few weeks appear to be getting worse? And I would point out that this isn't as bad as some previous polls have suggested, where the Conservative Party could only have 66, 70 seats. However, the party will be in panic. Superlatives like this, Sophie, they stick. Not only do they stick for the rest of the election campaign, but they will stick to the Conservative Party. And we have to remember that the key issues in this election campaign are the economy, healthcare, and immigration. And I think this probably tells us that they are still carrying the Truss Johnson legacy over the last 2 years, 3 years, COVID included, on the economy, but they probably haven't done enough since they kicked off the election campaign. So there'll be a lot of rethinking what they do with the time left to try and reduce those superlatives. It's very unlikely that a party with such a deficit can come back in the time, but as your commentators have been saying, the proof is in the polling day. So we do have to wait for that, but there is a real mountain ahead of them.
Yeah, mountain, to say the least. Tom, now I know Labour are very careful to say that they take nothing for granted, they're fighting for every vote. Do you think this chimes with what the Labour Party is picking up on the doorstep and with their own polling that they've been doing? Does it sound right?
Well, Labour will always be cautious about saying that they're going to win an election by a landslide, because they will say, and they're quite right to say it, that not a single vote has been counted yet. And a result like this, or a result like any sort of Labour win, will only happen if people vote for it, and they've got to keep on fighting all the way. Clearly, this will give them confidence, but it's not the same as a result. I think what I would say, though, is that although it's quite exciting to look at an MRP result that says, that Labour are going to win a massive majority, if you look at the polls that we've seen for the last several months, with Labour having a lead in the region of 20 points, with the Tories on the low 20s, what did you think that was going to translate into in terms of seats? That is the sort of polling that results in a Labour landslide, whether you do an MRP or not. And if you have a Labour landslide, then by definition, some of the people who lose their seats are going to be people that you've heard of who have quite senior jobs. So this is confirmation of polling that we've seen for several weeks and months now, rather than a brand new bolt from the blue. And in a way, that makes it more convincing than it would otherwise be. So the message from Labour is, I would think as a result of this is no complacency, but there's really something to fight for here, and quite. They will be confident but not complacent about what this suggests.
Yeah, as you say, it's not a polling outlier, which does seem to be a really important point to make. Poppy, given the fact that the Conservative Party are so far behind in the polls, and as you've both been saying, have been for several weeks and even months, I guess what many people will be asking is, why did Rishi Sunak call the election now? Do you think it was a mistake to do that?
It's just not for me to say whether it was a mistake or not, but I think the evidence today suggests that he'll be regretting the timing. The question really to ask was, what were his alternatives? A winter election just after Christmas, where he wouldn't have been able to hope on any better economic indicators coming through because he would have just been at the last possible moment. An autumn election where we may or may not have a rate cut. He tried to make a move on the best moment that he thought he had, economically speaking, where he could use a sort of expectation, hope of increasingly better outcomes as his sort of the wind beneath his wings, the fuel for his campaign. And that really hasn't worked. I really think the message in this polling is that the Conservative Party have not done enough to wipe out the legacy of the Truss administration and to make those economic messages clear to their voters. And Labour have done a very, very good job of it. They've been very prominent and it has been successful. And there are obviously other issues, and this type of research looks specifically at many different characteristics. But if there's one thing that the Conservatives are trying to do, which is to rely on their economic legacy, well, that just has not translated, and they'll be thinking, well, what have we got left then for firepower for the next few weeks, the next 3 weeks?
Yeah, not long to come up with it either. Tom, what we've seen, I guess, replicated in this polling is the Conservatives losing votes to just about everyone, the Lib Dems, Labour, Reform, and of course we had the announcement today that Nigel Farage is going to lead Reform, so perhaps making that even stronger influence in this election campaign. And we've also seen the difficulties of the SNP, really the honeymoon of the SNP finally starting to fade, and issues for them in Scotland too. So what's going on then? You know, has Keir Starmer picked up a four-leaf clover last year? Is he the luckiest man in Britain?
Well, I mean, there is some luck in the sense that not everything that has caused the Tories' poll weighting to drop is anything to do with what Labour has done. Labour didn't choose Liz Truss as leader of the Conservative Party, and they didn't force her to make the decisions that she made. And I think no one would deny that has helped, in the sense that there's been no change of government, certainly in my lifetime, that hasn't been, at least in part, the result of the incumbent government making some mistakes and being perceived to have failed, particularly on the economy. But nevertheless, Keir Starmer, these things don't go without saying. Keir Starmer's had to position himself as someone who is a viable, credible alternative to a Conservative Party that people have doubts about. And I think he's done that really effectively by demonstrating and by genuinely changing the party from a party that most people voted against at the last election into one that people are prepared to give the benefit of the doubt to. And I think what the big job for the next few weeks as the election campaign goes on is to help people to understand what Labour's plan is, because they've set out quite a lot of plans in quite a lot of areas, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of the public don't yet know what those plans are and need to be reassured, and to show that he's someone who is a credible alternative prime minister who can do a better job than the current incumbent or any of the 4 or 5 incumbents we've had in the last 5 minutes.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Tom Hamilton, Poppy Trowbridge, thank you for your time. Well, as they were saying, I guess the polling does suggest it, but it is still extraordinary when you see it like that. And on the 12th of June, Sky News will be hosting an election leaders event in Grimsby, a key marginal seat and one of our target towns this election year. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, and the Conservative leader, Rishi Sunak, have been invited to attend. And we're also looking for a live audience to join us on the night. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now for more information and to apply, with the potential opportunity to put your question to the men who want the keys to number 10. Well, it is an extraordinary MRP poll. If it is correct, if the YouGov projection is correct, then that would be a complete redrawing of the electoral map in the UK. I'll be back here on Sky News at 7 p.m. for the Politics Hub with lots of reaction to our poll and also to that press conference from Nigel Farage. I'll see you at 7.